Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity, and as a practicing chiropractor, this particular article really hits home. In addition, I spent quite a few years on a provider advisory panel for Optum, and several of the authors in this study I've had a lot of interaction with, and they're really smart data manipulation is not the right word, but data crunchers, I guess, to kind of look and see where the real answers lie. And this is not the first time that we've seen this, and in my opinion, again, as a chiropractor, is biased, but it's backed up by pretty much every study that asks the question of who's the best person to see first for a low back pain, or sometimes pretty much any musculoskeletal care episode. I see it all the time in my office. People are like, oh, well, my hip's hurting or my chest is hurting. I wasn't really sure if I should be here, and the answer is almost always yes. And why is that? It's because chiropractors very routinely stick with what are called care guidelines. We don't prescribe, so that's not the first thing we do. Imaging, as far as x-rays, MRIs, those need to be ordered when they're appropriate or if there's red flags. Not, hey, I'm having low back pain, let's go get an MRI and a CT scan and a spinal tap and an autopsy just to see what's going on. So DCs very consistently follow the guidelines, and that is conservative care first, spinal manipulation being top of the list. If things don't respond appropriately, then we look at doing imaging, or then we do MRI or CT scan. So really when we look at this, we look at what's called the group not MPIs, but the group provider group. So like in an episode of care, there could be a chiropractor, maybe imaging, maybe surgery if somebody doesn't respond well, because that does happen. If we do PCP, if somebody goes to a primary care doctor, they will get, if they get drugs from the pharmacy, if they get imaging, those are all grouped together as the cost of the case, not just the individual provider. Because on the front line, seeing a chiropractor usually is a little bit more expensive than seeing a primary care doctor. But when we look at everything else involved, it becomes a pretty efficient system of managing back pain. So what did they find in this study looking at like 616,000 cases of low back pain, accounting for over $1 billion in expenditures? Like it's a lot of data to look at. And the initial visits, 47.5% saw prescribers. So that includes DCs, that includes MDs, DOs, NPs, generally those people that can write prescriptions. And when you write prescriptions, that's what you're going to do when somebody comes in. So, and initially that starts a cascade of people not getting the best, most efficient course of care. If somebody saw a primary care doctor first, they were less likely to see a chiropractor later for manipulation. As far as non-prescribers, which DCs were the huge chunk of the group, PTs and acupuncturists were on there as well, but they were a much smaller percentage. It was 31%. Specialists, so think of orthopedic neuro, 14.5%, and ER or urgent care was 5.5%. That was the percentage when somebody had their first episode of low back pain. That's who they went to go see. And as always, we saw that seeing a chiropractor was a much more efficient pathway of care to not only cost efficiency, which you're like, oh, this is an insurance company, of course they want to look at the cost, but it also patient satisfaction. Those things are all in line. And also durable opioid use. There's just a lot of reasons why the DC becomes the choice of care. But instead of seeing 100% of this population, they saw 31%. So there's huge, massive room for improvement and cost savings. Again, we've seen this before. Believe it or not, neck and low back pain are one of the highest cost driver of any insurance company. Always seems strange. You think they'd want to drive care to chiropractors, but their insurance companies aren't really all that interested in saving money. They charge more. If they pay out more in claims, they can charge more in premiums. They're not there to save money. However, workman's comp, HR, they clearly have incentives to save money. Another interesting thing, 81% of these patients only had one visit with a care provider. It's not uncommon with us. Our goal is to see somebody and get them better as fast as possible. And sometimes that just involves one visit to work on them, loosen them up, and tell them to get their butt moving and don't be afraid to move. And we never see them again or see them again in 5 or 10 years. Like, that's the goal. So as always, I'll post a link to this particular study in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs information, and subscribe to the channel.